most persons would tell you that we survived COVID in the global south in terms because of our weather or whatever it was. People just, I'm surprised they say to be a scientific investigation as to why Africa, with all our disadvantages, were able to do so well in comparative terms with other climes. But just imagine that it wasn't that way. What would have happened? Because someone had predicted that dead bodies will be picked on the streets in Africa because of COVID. We shouldn't look at that statement in isolation because it could have been true. And because it could have been true makes this meeting really very important as to how the WHO is progressing and wants to go forward with how states prepare for this. Because at the end of it all, it's down to countries who are really disadvantaged. Having said that, what Lawyers Alert noticed in the course of the pandemic, COVID to be specific, when we were supporting persons whose rights were abused and all of that, was the fact that there's a need for the world and the WHO to come to grip with the fact that responses, pandemic-based response, should be rights-based. It must be rights-based. Rights-based in the sense that the world, governments and intergovernmental agencies have an obligation to reach out to the most marginalized in instances like that. Availability, access, and quality must be assured. And we have an opportunity to put that now in practice from the pandemic agreement that we are revising. It's a huge opportunity that we cannot forfeit. How can you, for example, say 20% in such a situation when you know that the 20% is going to be grabbed by the privileged, by persons who are rich and all of that, but the marginalized will not go near even that 20%. So we must think about expanding this to make access, to make accessibility a matter of rights. And that's why Lawyers Alert, and that's why civil society groups will talk about a right-based approach to pandemics. And so for us, this is really, really very important. And I like the word you keep mentioning, accountability. Because except documents like this, whether treaties, whether conventions, or whatever, unless you have some form of monitoring and compliance mechanism therein, then it doesn't make sense. Compliance speaks to accountability. So except we have this kind of things, words in very graphic terms, then it doesn't make room for, and I don't know what AHF is suggesting, but for me, issues like peer review are really critical in terms of if you can't put together that independent mechanism or body. What about peer review? These are things that we need to look at. And I agree with you too that you can't, in today's world, for heaven's sake, for goodness sake, how can you sit and draft an agreement that of things that will affect citizens and people and don't involve stakeholders in it? Principally now, CSOs, NGOs, and non-governmental bodies. It doesn't make sense because that is what gives it legitimacy. And so the legitimacy of a document that does not involve civil society organizations must be questioned. And I would want AHF to look at that critically, that, look, lack of taking on board civil society organizations is not a gap. It is a serious legitimacy issue. Because except we all come together and speak about how these things should be done and speak about the decision-making processes, then there's something wrong with it. WHO is not a northern thing, it's a global thing. And so we think civil society groups must be carried along in this. And so I am completely with this campaign and with what you are doing. I will end up by saying this. When you want to contextualize issues, then you need to be specific in the language. I've read the agreement. I've seen things like words as nebulous as giving the law, giving the circumstances, giving those they don't say anything. So I agree that they must be really, really very specific. At the last multi-stakeholder hearing in New York with regard to TB, when we were on the Universal Declaration, we insisted that we needed to get specific words alongside timelines so that governments are held accountable, stakeholders are held accountable as to what you need to do in such situations. And I think this is something in that light too. I want to end by saying thank you, AHF, for this conversation. And I think in as much as WHO has done so very much, they stand on the threshold of history in doing better. What we are saying is let us have a rights-based pandemic response that captures the interests of especially the marginalized population, especially in the Global South. Thank you.
Thank you very much.